I have always believed that kindness and hard work can change lives, but I never expected my own life to turn into a tale of fortune, betrayal, and justice. I was just a simple water carrier, walking through the village streets every day with buckets full of water, greeting people with a warm smile. The villagers admired my cheerful nature, and even though my life was simple, I felt rich in happiness. One day, something extraordinary happened. A messenger from the palace arrived at my doorstep, summoning me to meet the king himself. My heart pounded with excitement and fear. What could the king want with a humble water carrier like me? Gathering my courage, I stepped into the grand palace, my eyes widening at its golden walls and lavish decorations. The king smiled as he addressed me. "Shankar, I have heard of your good nature and hard work. From today you shall serve in my palace, bringing water for me and my guests." I could hardly believe it. I rushed home to share the joyous news with my wife, then dressed in my best clothes and returned to the palace, eager to start my new life. Days turned into weeks, and soon I became more than just a servant. The king enjoyed my stories and laughter, calling me often to entertain his guests. The courtiers, too, listened in admiration. I felt honored, but my happiness was short-lived. Not everyone in the palace was pleased with my presence. The king's minister, once his most trusted advisor, grew jealous of me. He could not accept that a mere water carrier had won the king's favor. With a cunning smile, he approached me one evening and whispered, "Shankar, I must tell you something important. The king has been complaining about the bad smell of your breath. He does not want to embarrass you, but it bothers him greatly." My heart sank in shame. Had my presence been an annoyance all along? The minister continued, pretending to be sympathetic. "To avoid offending the king, you should wear a mask over your mouth whenever you are near him." I nodded, grateful for the advice. The next day I entered the palace with a cloth covering my face, hoping to remain in the king's good graces. Days passed, and I never removed the mask in the king's presence. He noticed, but said nothing. However, curiosity eventually got the better of him. One evening, he turned to the minister and asked, "Why does Shankar always wear that mask?" The minister smirked, seizing his chance. "My lord," he said with false concern, "I asked him the same thing. He told me he finds your breath unpleasant." The king's face darkened in fury. Betrayal burned in his chest. How could someone he had trusted insult him so deeply? Without hesitation, he ordered, "Call the executioner. Stand by the palace gate, and when you see a man carrying a bouquet of roses, cut off his head immediately." The next morning, I arrived at the palace, as cheerful as ever. The king, hiding his anger, handed me a beautiful bouquet of roses as a reward for my service. I bowed respectfully and stepped out, unaware of the trap that had been set. As I walked through the palace halls, the minister stopped me. "Who gave you those roses?" he asked, his voice laced with curiosity. "The king," I replied, smiling. "He wanted to reward me for my service." Greed flashed in the minister's eyes. With a sneer, he snatched the bouquet from my hands. "I deserve this more than you," he scoffed and marched toward the palace gates, his head held high. As the minister stepped out of the palace, clutching the bouquet, the executioner stood ready. He had been given clear orders. The man carrying the roses must die. Without a moment's hesitation, the blade swung, and the minister's life came to an abrupt end. He had unknowingly walked into the very trap he had set for me. Meanwhile, I returned home that evening, completely unaware of what had happened at the palace gates. The next morning, I walked into the palace as usual, my mask still covering my face. The king, expecting never to see me again, gasped in shock. "Shankar, you are alive?" he exclaimed. I bowed respectfully. "Yes, my lord," I replied. "I have come to serve, as always." The king's eyes narrowed. "Tell me, why do you always wear that mask in my presence?" His tone carried a mix of curiosity and suspicion. I hesitated for a moment, then answered honestly, "My lord, the minister told me that you found my breath unpleasant. I did not wish to offend you." A heavy silence fell upon the court. The king's expression shifted from confusion to realization. He let out a long breath, piecing together the truth. His trusted minister had deceived him, but instead of harming me, he had walked straight into his own demise. The king leaned forward. "And what happened to the bouquet of roses I gave you yesterday?" he asked, his voice softer now. I smiled innocently. The minister took it from me, my lord. He said he deserved it more than I did. At that moment, the weight of the entire scheme dawned on the king. His anger melted into laughter. Indeed, he chuckled, he deserved those roses more than you did. The entire court erupted into laughter, their voices echoing through the grand hall. Justice had been served, but more importantly, the truth had revealed itself in the most unexpected way. The king stood from his throne and approached me. Shankar, you have always been honest and kind. Despite the deception and trials placed in your path, you remain true to yourself. From today, you shall be more than just a water carrier. You will be my royal storyteller. Tears welled in my eyes as I knelt in gratitude. A mere servant had become an honored member of the king's court, not through wealth or power, but through kindness, patience, and sincerity. The people of the kingdom rejoiced, celebrating my rise to fortune. This story is not just about me. It is about the lessons life teaches us. Those who plot against others out of jealousy often fall into their own traps. Goodness, honesty, and sincerity never go unnoticed. No matter how difficult the journey, fate always rewards a pure heart. So, whenever life challenges you, remember this: stay true to yourself, keep kindness in your heart, and never let the whispers of deceit shake your faith. The right path will always reveal itself, just as it did for me. The end.